The building always looked different at night. During the day, it was full of noise. Phones ringing, shoes tapping against a marble floor, people speaking in quick, sharp voices. But after sunset, the glass walls reflected only the city lights, and the long hallways became quiet enough to hear the hum of the air vents. On the top floor, a private dinner was coming to an end. The long table in the executive lounge was covered with empty plates and half-filled glasses. The board meeting had been tense, but now the mood had shifted. Jackets were off. Ties were loose. Laughter floated through the room. At the head of the table stood the CEO. He was a man used to being listened to. Even when he made jokes, people laughed a little louder than necessary. He enjoyed that. He enjoyed the control, the way conversations paused when he raised his hand. Across the wide hallway, pushing a mop bucket with steady hands, the janitor moved quietly. He worked every evening shift. Most people barely noticed him. He wore the same faded uniform each day, always clean, always pressed. His hair had turned silver years ago, but his back remained straight. He moved with care, never rushing, never dragging his feet. He had already cleaned 3 floors. The executive level was always last. The door to the lounge opened suddenly. A few executives stepped out, still laughing. One of them almost bumped into the janitor's cart. "Careful there," the man said lightly, stepping around the bucket. The janitor gave a small nod. "Sorry, sir." "No harm done," another voice added. Then the CEO appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching the scene with amusement. His cheeks were slightly red from wine. He looked relaxed, confident, almost playful. His eyes settled on the janitor. "You're here every night, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the janitor replied softly. "What's your name?" The janitor told him. The CEO repeated it as if testing the sound, then smiled in a way that made the others look at each other. "Tell me," the CEO continued, stepping into the hallway, "do you ever get bored cleaning up after us?" A few people chuckled. The janitor paused for a moment. "It's honest work," he said. "It keeps the building running." "Honest work," the CEO repeated, as if it were an interesting phrase. "That's good. That's very good." His gaze shifted past the janitor, toward the glass-walled conference room across the hall. Inside that room sat a grand piano. It had been placed there years ago when the company first moved into the building. At the time, it was meant to show culture and success. It was polished every week. Almost no one touched it. The CEO pointed toward it. "Do you play?" he asked suddenly. The question seemed random, but everyone turned to look at the piano. The janitor followed their eyes. For a brief second, something moved across his face. It was small and quick, like a shadow passing over water. Then it was gone. "No, sir," he said. "No, not at all," the CEO pressed. "No, sir." One of the board members laughed. "Can you imagine?" The CEO straightened and walked slowly toward the piano room. The others followed. The janitor stayed by his cart, unsure whether to continue mopping or wait. "Come here," the CEO called out. The janitor hesitated, then left the mop against the wall and stepped closer. He stopped just outside the glass doors. The city lights reflected off the polished surface of the piano. It looked untouched, almost lonely. The CEO rested his hand on it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "Italian, custom-made, cost more than most cars." He turned back toward the janitor, smiling. "I've always liked classical music," he went on. "Chopin, especially. There's something powerful about it. Complicated, emotional, not easy to play." The room grew quiet, waiting for whatever he would say next. The CEO folded his arms. "Tell you what," he said casually. "If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you." The words hung in the air. For half a second, no one reacted. Then laughter burst out, loud and sharp. Someone nearly spilled their drink. Another person covered their mouth, trying to hide their smile. The CEO laughed too, pleased with himself. The janitor stood still. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply looked at the piano. "Well," one of the executives teased. "Go on. We're waiting." The janitor lowered his eyes. "I don't play, sir," he said again. The CEO waved his hand dismissively. "Of course you don't. Relax. It's a joke." More laughter followed. But the moment did not feel light anymore. At least not for everyone. One younger employee standing near the back shifted uncomfortably. Another looked down at the floor. The joke had stretched just a little too far. The CEO stepped away from the piano. All right, he said. Let's call it a night. Big day tomorrow. The group slowly moved toward the elevators, still talking among themselves. As they passed the janitor, some avoided eye contact. Others gave small, awkward smiles. Within minutes, the hallway was empty again. Only the janitor remained. He stood there for a while, staring at the piano through the glass. The building had returned to silence. The air felt heavier now. After a moment, he walked back to his cart and picked up the mop. He dipped it into the bucket and began to clean the floor outside the conference room. His movements were steady, but slower than before. Inside his chest, something old had been stirred. He finished mopping the hallway and emptied the bucket in the maintenance room. When he returned, he paused once more by the piano. The glass door was unlocked. It usually was. He reached for the handle, then stopped. His reflection looked back at him. Silver hair, lined face, simple uniform. He let go of the handle. Not tonight, he whispered to himself. Instead, he turned off the lights in the hallway and continued his rounds. Down on the lower floors, he wiped desks, straightened chairs, and collected trash bins. He worked the same way he always did. Careful, quiet, invisible. But his mind was not on the work. The words echoed in his ears. If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you. It had been said as a joke, a careless sentence thrown into the air for entertainment. For the others, it was already forgotten. For him, it was not. When his shift ended, it was past midnight. He changed out of his uniform in a small storage room that served as his locker space. He folded it neatly, placed it on the shelf, and put on his old coat. Outside, the city was cool and quiet. He did not take the bus right away. Instead, he sat on a bench across the street from the building. From there, he could see the top floor windows glowing faintly. He remembered another night, many years ago, when lights had shone on him for a different reason. Back then, he had not worn a janitor's uniform. Back then, people had waited for him to sit at a piano. He closed his eyes. The memory was clear. The feel of smooth keys beneath his fingers, the weight of silence before the first note, the way a room could change when music filled it. He had once known every movement of Chopin's hands, as if they were his own. Life, however, had a way of changing direction without warning. He opened his eyes and looked at his hands now. They were rougher. The skin was lined and worn from years of cleaning chemicals and cold water. But they were steady, very steady. Across the street, a security guard stepped outside for a quick smoke break. The guard nodded politely at him. "Long night?" the guard asked. "Like always," the janitor replied. "Heard you all laughing up there," the guard said casually. The janitor gave a small smile. "Yes, they had a good evening." The guard flicked ash onto the sidewalk. "Must be nice." The janitor did not answer. After a few minutes, he stood and finally headed toward the bus stop. As the bus carried him through the sleeping city, he stared out the window. Streetlights passed like slow-moving stars. He was not angry. He was not ashamed. But something inside him had shifted. The next evening would come, just like every other. The floors would need cleaning. The trash bins would fill. The piano would sit behind glass, untouched. And yet, for the first time in years, he found himself wondering what would feel like to press those keys again. Not for applause, not for pride, but simply to answer a question that had been thrown at him as a joke. If you can play Chopin. The bus slowed to a stop. He stepped off and walked the final blocks to his small apartment. The hallway light flickered as he unlocked his door. Inside, the room was simple. A narrow bed, a small table, a bookshelf filled with old, worn pages. In the corner, covered carefully with a cloth, stood something he had not touched in a long time. He walked toward it slowly. He rested his hand on the cloth, but did not remove it. Not yet. Instead, he turned away, washed his hands, and prepared for sleep. But as he lay in the dark, the music began to play in his mind, clear, detailed, alive. And somewhere across the city, on the top floor of a shining glass building, A grand piano waited in silence. The next morning began like any other. The janitor woke before sunrise, not because of an alarm, but because his body was used to it. Years of early shifts and long nights had trained him well. He sat up slowly, letting his feet touch the cold floor. Outside the small window, the sky was still gray, undecided about the day. He washed his face, brewed a cup of plain coffee, and sat at the table without turning on the radio. Silence had always felt easier for him. But today, the silence was different. His thoughts kept drifting back to the night before. The laughter, the careless words, the piano behind the glass. He told himself it didn't matter. People with power said foolish things all the time. He had learned that long ago. Still, the memory refused to fade. After breakfast, he stood in front of the covered object in the corner of the room again. The cloth was old, slightly yellow at the edges. He had washed it many times over the years, careful not to let dust settle underneath. He reached out. This time, he pulled the cloth away. An upright piano stood beneath it. The wood was scratched in places, dull where polish had once shined. A few keys were slightly discolored. It wasn't grand or beautiful anymore, but it was solid. It had survived moves, time, and neglect. He sat down on the small bench. For a long moment, he did nothing. Then he pressed one key. The sound came out soft but clear. He pressed another. Then another. His fingers hesitated, unsure of themselves, like they were waking from a deep sleep. He stopped, exhaled slowly, and placed both hands properly on the keys. The first simple notes filled the room. He did not try anything difficult, just a slow pattern. Familiar, safe. The music carried him backward. He remembered being young, sitting in rooms much larger than this one, rooms filled with quiet people and high ceilings. He remembered how his hands had once moved without thought, how the piano had felt like an extension of his own breath. Back then, people had listened. Back then, music had been his future. The sound wavered slightly, and he stopped. His hands rested in his lap. Those days felt far away now, almost like someone else's life. He stood up and covered the piano again. Enough, he said aloud, as if speaking to himself would end the feeling. He dressed for work and left the apartment. The bus ride passed quietly. He watched people climb on and off, their faces tired, their minds already busy with worries. No one paid him much attention. He was used to that too. By evening, he was back in the building. The lobby was loud and bright. Conversations echoed. Perfume and coffee mixed in the air. He pushed his cart past the front desk, nodding politely at the security staff. As he reached the elevators, he noticed something unusual. The piano room lights were on. That almost never happened. He said nothing and continued his work on the lower floors first. He cleaned offices where people had left half-written notes on whiteboards and photos of families on desks. He straightened chairs and wiped fingerprints from glass walls. Time passed. When he finally reached the executive level, the hallway was empty, but the lights inside the piano room were still on. He slowed his steps. As he approached, he heard voices. 2 employees stood inside near the piano. One of them was pressing random keys, laughing at the sounds. No, that's not how it goes, the other said, trying to stop him. I don't know anything about music, the first replied. It all sounds the same to me. They noticed a janitor standing outside the glass. Oh, one of them said, slightly embarrassed. Sorry, we were just killing time. That's fine, he replied. Did you hear about last night? The other asked, lowering her voice. He nodded gently. I was there. She looked uncomfortable. He didn't mean anything by it. I understand, he said. They exchanged glances, then left the room, turning off the lights behind them. The hallway fell quiet again. The janitor leaned his mop against the wall. He stood in front of the glass door. He told himself he would keep working, that he had floors to clean and schedules to follow. Instead, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of polish and old wood. He walked toward the piano slowly, like approaching an old friend after many years apart. He sat down. His hands hovered above the keys. He closed his eyes. This time, he did not start with simple notes. He began with Chopin. The opening notes were careful, restrained. He played softly, letting his fingers adjust. The piano responded differently than the one at home. The keys were lighter, the sound fuller. The music grew steadier. Down the hall, a security guard paused. On another floor, someone stepped out an elevator and froze when they heard the sound. The janitor did not notice. He was no longer in the building. He was somewhere else, somewhere between memory and now. His hands moved with purpose. Not rushed, not showing off, just honest. The piece unfolded naturally, each note falling into place. A small group began to gather outside the room. No one spoke. The music carried a quiet sadness, but also calm. It did not demand attention. It invited it. The janitor finished the piece and let his hands rest on the keys. For a moment, the silence felt louder than the music. Then he stood up. He had not planned what came next. He only knew he felt lighter than he had in years. He turned toward the door. That was when he saw the CEO. The man stood at the end of the hallway, alone. His jacket was buttoned. His expression was not playful now. It was serious, focused. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The janitor gave a small nod, respectful but distant. He walked past the CEO without a word. The CEO did not stop him. That night, the janitor finished his shift as usual. He emptied bins, locked supply rooms, and signed out at the desk. But whispers followed him. "Did you hear that?" That was him. I had no idea. He pretended not to notice. Outside, the air felt cooler than usual. He breathed deeply. At home, he uncovered his piano again. This time, he did not hesitate. He played until his fingers ached. He played pieces he had not touched in decades. Some notes came back easily. Others took effort. His hands were older, slower, but they remembered more than he had expected. Hours passed. When he finally stopped, the room was dark. He sat quietly, listening to the last echoes fade. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know if anyone would speak to him about what they had heard. But one thing was clear. He was done hiding from the music. The question thrown at him as a joke no longer felt like an insult. It felt like an invitation. And for the first time in a very long while, he was ready to answer it. The next day felt heavier than usual. The janitor noticed at the moment he stepped into the building. People looked at him longer than before. Some smiled. Some looked away quickly. A few whispered, thinking he could not hear. He kept his eyes forward and pushed his cart toward the elevators. Nothing about his routine changed. He cleaned the lobby floors. He wiped the glass doors. He nodded to the guards and the front desk staff like he always did. Inside, though, something had shifted. By late afternoon, the building buzzed with quiet curiosity. The story had spread faster than he expected. Not in loud conversations, but in small comments and sideways glances. Was that really him? I thought it was someone else. No, I'm sure of it. He heard these things as he passed open offices, but no one said them to his face. When evening came, the executive stayed later than usual. Lights remained on across the top floors. Meetings stretched. Doors opened and closed. He waited. He always did. When the elevators finally slowed and the building began to empty, he started his work upstairs. Halfway down the long hallway, a voice stopped him. "Can we talk?" He turned. The CEO stood a few steps away. No jacket this time. No wine. Just a tired face and folded arms. "Yes, sir," the janitor replied. They stood in silence for a moment. "I heard you last night," the CEO said. "So I was told," the janitor answered calmly. "You never said you could play," the CEO continued. The janitor nodded. "You never asked seriously." The words were not sharp, but they landed. The CEO exhaled slowly. "I didn't mean to insult you." "I know," the janitor said. Another pause. "Where did you learn?" the CEO asked. "Long ago," the janitor replied. "In another life." The CEO studied him. "Why stop?" The janitor looked down at his hands. "Life asked me to." The CEO seemed to want to say more, then stopped. "Well," he said finally, "people are talking." "I assumed they would," the janitor said. "There's a company event tomorrow evening," the CEO added. "Small investors, partners." The janitor waited. "There's a piano," the CEO said. "You've already noticed." "Yes. I'd like you to play." The hallway felt very quiet. The janitor did not answer right away. "Not as a joke," the CEO said quickly. "As music." The janitor considered this. "Why?" he asked. The CEO hesitated. "Because what I heard last night mattered." The janitor nodded once. "I'll think about it." "That's all I ask," the CEO said. He walked away, leaving the janitor alone again. That night, the janitor did not take the bus home. He walked. The city felt different when he moved through it slowly. He passed closed shops and quiet cafes. His thoughts were loud in his head. He had never played for people like that before. Not like this. At home, he sat at his old piano and opened a notebook he had not touched in years. Inside were handwritten notes, markings, reminders. His past sat on those pages. He played. He stopped. He played again. This time, he practiced not for memory, but for honesty. The next day arrived quickly. The building was decorated by late afternoon. Soft lights, clean tables, low voices. The piano room doors were open. He arrived early. He wore his uniform, clean and pressed. As guests began to arrive, he stayed in the background, just another worker moving quietly along the edges. When the CEO spotted him, he gave a small nod. The janitor nodded back. As the evening settled, the CEO tapped the glass lightly. "Before we continue," he said, "we have something special tonight." The room turned toward the piano. The janitor felt every eye move to him. He walked forward. Not fast, not slow. He sat down. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then he played. The first notes were gentle, almost cautious. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. People leaned in without realizing it. The music filled the room naturally, like it had always belonged there. The janitor forgot where he was. He forgot who was watching. He played as himself. When the final note faded, no one moved. Then someone clapped. Then everyone did. The janitor stood and bowed slightly. He returned to his cart and continued his work. Behind him, the CEO watched in silence. Nothing was said that night, but everything had changed. The applause faded, but the feeling stayed. The guests slowly returned to their conversations, though their voices were softer now. Some glanced toward the piano again, as if expecting more. Others spoke in low tones, trying to describe what they had just heard. The janitor pushed his cart down the hallway, keeping his head low. Inside, his chest felt tight, not from fear, but from release. Playing had opened something he had kept closed for too long. He finished his task for the night without interruption. No one stopped him. No one asked questions. That silence felt louder than words. When his shift ended, he signed out and left the building. Outside, the air was warm. The city lights blurred slightly as his eyes adjusted. He stood for a moment, unsure whether to go straight home. Instead, he walked. His thoughts drifted to the faces in the room. Some had looked surprised, others thoughtful. A few almost looked ashamed. He did not judge them. He had lived long enough to know that people often acted without thinking. Power made that easier. At home, he did not touch the piano. He sat at the table and drank a glass of water, letting the quiet settle. Sleep came slowly. The next day, things felt different again. When he entered the building that evening, several people greeted him first. "Good evening." "Hello." One person even thanked him for the music. He nodded politely, unsure how to respond. On the executive floor, the CEO waited near the elevators. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. "Yes," the janitor said. They walked into a small meeting room. "I owe you an apology," the CEO said. For that night, the janitor listened quietly. "I use humor to feel important," the CEO continued. "I didn't see you as a person." The janitor met his eyes. "Most people don't." The CEO swallowed. "I want to fix that." "You can," the janitor replied, "by treating people better." The CEO nodded slowly. "Would you consider teaching?" he asked. "Teaching. Music lessons. For employees. If you want." The janitor smiled faintly. "I'll think about it." That night, he played again at home. This time, not Chopin. Something simpler. The days that followed brought quiet change. The janitor noticed fewer sharp words in meetings, fewer jokes at someone else's expense. The CO listened more, and the janitor kept cleaning. He did not stop being who he was, but he was no longer invisible. One evening, as he finished mopping near the piano room, a young employee approached. "I've never heard music like that," she said. "It made me feel calm." "That's what music is for," he replied. She smiled and walked away. The piano room light stayed on more often now. Sometimes he played. Sometimes he didn't. The choice was his. And that made all the difference. Time moved forward, steady and quiet. Weeks passed after the night of the performance. The building returned to its normal rhythm, but something underneath had changed. The janitor felt it in small ways. People held doors open longer. Conversations paused when he passed, not out of fear, but respect. Some smiled like they wanted to say something, but didn't know how. He did not mind. He had never played music for attention. One evening, the CEO stopped him near the elevator. "I've been thinking," the CEO said, "about what you told me." The janitor waited. "I realize I built this place on results," the CEO continued, "but I forgot about dignity." The janitor nodded. "It's easy to forget when you're always on top." The CEO gave a small, honest smile. "I'm trying to remember now." Nothing more needed to be said. The janitor returned to his work. At home, his life stayed simple. He woke early. He cooked modest meals. He played the piano most nights, not to impress anyone, but because it felt right again. Sometimes he made mistakes. He didn't mind those either. One Saturday afternoon, a flyer appeared on the bulletin board in the lobby. "Music hour, open to anyone." No big announcement. No fancy language. Just an invitation. The janitor saw it and smiled. That evening, a small group gathered near the piano. Some sat on chairs. Others leaned against the walls. The janitor arrived last. No one clapped when he sat down. They simply waited. He played, not perfectly, but honestly. When he finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then someone let out a slow breath. "I didn't know I needed that," a voice said. The janitor stood and stepped away. From that night on, the piano was no longer decoration. It became a place where people stopped pretending for a while. The janitor never stopped cleaning. He never asked for a new title or role. Music was not a ladder for him anymore. It was home. One late night, after everyone had gone, he sat alone at the piano. He played Chopin again, not to answer a joke, but to close a chapter. As the last note faded, he rested his hands and looked around the empty room. He felt complete. Outside, the city continued on, unaware what had changed inside a quiet building. The janitor turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked down the hallway. For the first time in many years, he felt seen, not as a performer, not as a janitor, but as a person. And that was enough.